All right. So, welcome to our study group for chapters 6 through 10 with ICD-10-CM. So, the first question that we have for this one, it's not necessarily a how to find the question or find the code, but it is just a general guidelines question. So, according to ICD-10-CM guidelines, what is the maximum length for a myocardial infarction to be considered acute? So if you want to put in the chat either the letter, yep. So we've got Crystal says 4 weeks. Yep, perfect. So that's according to your ICD-10-CM guidelines. So this is one that you may possibly see in your guidelines section question or your guidelines section of the exam that they're not necessarily asking you codes, but they're asking you to interpret those guidelines. So now going on to Tansy, what's your question, hun? You can come off mute. There you go.
I'm sorry, can you hear me?
Yes.
I'm sorry about that. Where is this in
Oh,
the
you're okay.
guidelines? Is it G14 or G15?
Let me look. Do you have the 2024 AAPC?
Yes.
Okay. I just want to make sure I'm looking at the right pages and not in a different book. So it's actually going to be on page, page G17. It's going to be underneath letter E for acute myocardial infarction. Do you see it?
Yes, I see it. Thank you.
Okay. You're welcome. Okay. So for number 2, what ICD-10-CM code is going to be used to report the first episode of an acute myocardial infarction? So how would we look this up? What's our main term we're going to look up in the alphabetic index? Infarction. Yep. So let's go to infarction. Infarction is the entry. And then we'll go down to myocardium. And then the acute is in our parentheses. Does everybody remember, or does anyone remember what those terms are called that are enclosed within parentheses? So there's a definition or there's a term that we use when we see terms are in parentheses. Does anybody know what they're called? Any guesses? Yep. Non-essential modifiers. Yep. Perfect. So our acute is going to be our non-essential modifier, and then with a stated duration of 4 weeks or less. So then our code that we're going to use is I-21.9. Real world, we always want to go back and make sure that we verify our code in the tabular, right? From a testing perspective, you should if you have time. But if we see that that is our code description, or not the description, if we see that that's our code that is in the options, then we can just use the I-25.9. Any questions on that one? I'm sorry, I-21.9, not I-25.9. Sorry. I was looking at a different line that had the 25. Any questions on number 2? Okay. So let's look at number 3. 70-year-old patient with decompensated COPD is admitted to the hospital with an acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma. So in this scenario, we have 2 conditions, right? We have decompensated COPD, and then we have the acute exacerbation of your bronchial asthma. Should we code them both? Is one going to be included in the other? How do you guys want to approach this one? Yep. Okay. Okay. So we will look up both the COPD and the asthma. Yep. So for this one, we can look at asthma. So we'll go main term asthma. Underneath asthma, we want to go to your with COPD or the chronic obstructive pulmonary disease. And then there is the exacerbation because the exacerbation is going to apply to both our bronchial asthma and the COPD. Does that make sense? So that acute exacerbation of the asthma is also causing an exacerbation of the COPD. So what's our code that we're going to use for the asthma with COPD and an exacerbation? Yep, J44.1. And that's going to be our COPD code. Okay, so let's go look at J44.1, see if we need an additional code. We know from a testing perspective, we know our answer, but let's look at this from a real world and make sure that we know how to kind of read our tabular as well. So J44.1 is going to be for your COPD with an acute exacerbation. And then we have a code also note at the top of our J44 category that indicates that we need to code also our type of asthma if applicable. So now we need to go back to our asthma and code the actual asthma code. Does that make sense? So we'll go back to asthma. And then it is an acute exacerbation of bronchial asthma. So bronchial is going to be our non-essential modifier. We'll go down to with exacerbation. We're going to skip the COPD entry, but we'll just go down to exacerbation. And then what code does that give us? So asthma with exacerbation gives us J45.901. Okay. Like I said, from a testing perspective, once we found that COPD with the exacerbation, then we knew what our answer was. But I want to make sure that everybody knows real world, we're not always going to have multiple choice. So real world, we do still need to code our type of asthma that was indicated, and that J44.1 does not include both COPD and asthma, even though it's underneath the asthma main term. The J44.1 is still just the COPD with the exacerbation. Any questions on that one? Okay. Number 4, patient with coronary arteriosclerosis disease or CAD sees his cardiologist to discuss a coronary artery bypass graft or a CABG. This will be the patient's first CABG. So what is our main term that we're going to look up? Disease. Yep. So we'll go to disease. Yes. So Kristen, what's your question about the main term?
I was just wondering if with CAD, is it just kind of known that it's always going to end up being arteriosclerosis? You know, like after a while, can you stop going to like disease and then jumping around? Do you see what I mean? Like, I don't know if I'm expressing
You,
clearly
I
enough.
mean, yeah, you can for sure.
Okay.
Or you can go to, if you go to disease and then heart,
Right.
let's see, hang on. If we go to, let me see how I would do this. So I would do disease and then coronary,
Right.
and then that will tell you to see disease, heart, ischemic, atherosclerotic.
Right.
So then once we go there and we go to disease, heart, let's look it up. Ischemic and then atherosclerotic.
Okay.
So the issue with this one is because there's not angina pectoris or there's not something else, then we wouldn't necessarily want to go to arteriosclerosis.
Okay.
I don't think. Let me double check. I could be totally wrong because I'm not
And I think we're going to see this again in like question 8. That's where I ended up jumping around.
probably. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So arteriosclerosis, and then let's see if we go to coronary. So yeah, okay. This one in this scenario, yes, you can do both.
Okay.
Yes. So in this
Just
scenario,
trying
I
to
don't
figure
want
out
to
what
say
is.
every single time because it really is just going to be dependent, right? Every scenario is going to be a little
Right.
bit different. But in
Got it.
this scenario, yes, we are able to go to arteriosclerosis and then heart, or sorry, coronary.
Okay.
Yep. Okay. So with that being said, yep, Dawn is right. I-25.10. Okay.
Sorry, I do have a question, and I'm sorry to interrupt. So for I-25-810, it says coronary artery bypass graft without angina pectoris. And
Mm-hmm.
then for I-25.10, so I'm just going back there right now. It says unstate. Wait.
Yeah. So your
Oh, it also says without in. Okay.
I-25.810 is because at this point they do not have the cabbage. They're talking about getting one, but
Oh,
the cabbage is not present. So that's why we wouldn't use the 810.
okay. Okay. Sorry about that.
No, you're fine. Any other questions?
Hey, sorry I'm late. How did I miss a lot?
No, we just started. We're only on question 4.
Hi, Tiffany.
Hey.
This I just sent you a message in Discord, I think it is. I didn't really
Okay.
know what that was, but I ended up signing in and signing up because I thought the class was going to be there, but I found it
No,
now.
you're fine. You're
Okay.
totally fine. Thanks for
Right.
joining.
No, thank you. Mhm.
Okay. So let's go on to number 5. So we have a 32-year-old patient with an ophthalmoplegic migraine, and they are not responding to medication, and they're admitted to the observation unit. So what's our main term for this one? Yep, we're going to go to migraine. Underneath migraine, what is our type of migraine that we have? Ophthalmoplegic. Yep. And then we have with refractory migraine, intractable, not intractable, and then without refractory migraine. So our
Yo
scenario,
estoy lista, ahí me pongo a ver cuál es que está abierto. Me voy, sí, a China
in
me da.
our scenario, if they are not responding to medication, is that going to be intractable or not intractable? So if they are not responding to medication, that's going to be considered intractable. So we're going to go with G43.B1. Okay. So when you have an intractable migraine, then that means that it is not responding to medication. When you have a not intractable migraine, then it means that it is responding to medication. So if those terms confuse you and you have a difficulty remembering which one is which, you can always write those definitions at the top in the margin. So intractable means that it does not respond. Not intractable means it does respond to medication. Okay, any questions on that one? I know, Dawn, my brain always goes the opposite. Because you would think not
Yeah.
intractable means it does not respond. Yeah, mine always.
Yeah.
So always think, what would your brain and your gut tell you, and go with the opposite on that one. It took me a long time to be able to not have to sit and think about it. Okay. Any other questions on that one?
Yeah, I have a question.
Okay.
I'm looking up like in our, I don't see the G43.B1. So I'm not understanding where the B come from.
In the tabular.
Yeah, I have it.
Okay.
Yeah, in the tabular, I couldn't find it.
So the B and the 1 is going to be on page. Do you have the 2024
Yes.
AAPC ICD-10? It's on
Yeah.
page 606. So it's in between the 7 and the 8. Why they do that, I have absolutely no idea. Because my brain would think it would either be at the beginning or the end. But it is in between the 7 and the 8, the 0.7 and the 0.8. So your G43 point A, B, C, and D are all right there together.
Okay. Okay.
And hey,
Yep.
sorry.
And then,
sorry.
no, you're fine. And then E is over on the next page.
Yeah.
So when you feel like you have a rhyme or reason to it, then it just goes and throws another loop.
And then you said that intractable means that they're not responding, right?
Intractable means they do not respond, correct. And then not intractable means that they do respond.
Okay.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Tansy, did you have another question? You're welcome.
No, I just needed that. Okay, sorry again. So
Okay.
intractable does not respond, intractable does respond.
Correct. Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Let's do number 6. Pediatrician sees an 8-month-old patient for ear pulling and excessive crying. The infant is diagnosed with bilateral, chronic, and acute serous otitis media. So we have 2 different types of otitis media. If we have, our guidelines tells us, if we have chronic and acute, which one should be sequenced first? Yep, our acute. Okay, so keep that in mind. What's our main term that we're going to look up? Okay, otitis. Yep. Underneath otitis, we'll go to media. And then we will go to acute. And then we're going to go to serous. I'm not expecting anybody to type this out in the chat, but if anybody wants to come off of mute, where does it tell us to go underneath otitis, media, acute, serous?
Non-suppressive.
Yep. Otitis media, non-suppurative, acute, serous. Yep.
Sorry.
No, you're fine. I know it's a weird word. It is a weird word for sure. So we're going to go otitis, media, non-suppurative, and then acute. Underneath acute, we still need to go to serous, right? And that gives us what code? Dawn, you are under recurrent. So you need to go down to serous. So yeah, H65.0. So we're looking at the acute version first. So H65.0. And then what is our fifth character, the fifth digit for bilateral? 0.03. Yep. Yep. So that's for our acute otitis media, or the acute serous otitis media. Now we need to look for the chronic. So let's go back to the index and we'll go back underneath that weird non-suppurative word. We'll go down to chronic and serous. And then which one are we going to look at for that?
Bilateral. 865.23.
Well, in the alphabetic index, underneath otitis, non-suppurative, chronic, and serous, what's our code that we're going to verify in the tabular?
865.2.
Yep. And then once you get back to H65.2, what's our code for the bilateral?
H65.23.
Yep, 0.23. Now, from a testing perspective, if we had that 0.03 first, we knew which one to use, right? We knew what our answer was going to be. So in a testing environment, we don't have to go through everything as long as we can get to that answer and rule it out with the process of elimination. That's absolutely 100% what you can do. Yep.
And Tiffany, I have a question. So
Yeah.
when they're asking for when it's chronic and acute, we
Mhm.
have to code both of those instead of just coding the acute. We have to code the chronic
Yes.
and the acute.
Yes, you
They're
have to
both
code both.
together.
Mhm.
Okay.
Yep. The only time that you would use a single code is if in your alphabetic index there is an acute with chronic option.
Okay.
So that's the only time you would use a single code. If there's not that acute with chronic option in your alphabetic index, then you would code them separately with your acute listed first.
Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Good
Thanks.
question. You're welcome. Okay. Any other questions on number 6?
And Tiffany, one other question. I have a question.
Yeah.
So you always
Yeah.
said that you always code the acute first and then chronic. Is that right?
Correct. Yep. Mhm.
Okay, so I'll
Yeah,
remember
there's
it
a
as
guideline. Yep. There's a
A
guideline that
first.
does talk about that. Yeah.
Okay. A first
So
before
let
C.
me.
Okay.
Yep.
I
Yep.
can remember that. Okay.
So that
Thank
is
you.
in your guidelines. If you have the 2024 AAPC,
Uh-huh.
then that is on page G5,
How
and
about
it's number
220?
8.
How about 20? I have 223. Do you have that?
Well, no, in your guidelines.
Oh, the guidelines. Okay. I got you.
Yes.
Okay. All
Yes.
right. Yes.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome. All right. Let's move on to number 7. A 9-year-old with a history of reactive airway disease, or RAD, was admitted into overnight observation with complaints of a 2-day history of increased wheezing. The parent stated that nebulizer treatments are not helping, and after monitoring and additional treatments were given while in observation, the breathing was stabilized. Your your documented diagnosis is RAD exacerbation. So what's our condition? Yep, we're going to look up disease. Yep. If you know, yes, I was going to say, if you know that reactive airway disease is also asthma, then you can go directly to asthma. If you don't know, you would go to disease, airway reactive, or disease reactive airway, and then you would be directed to see asthma. Correct. Yep. So let's go to asthma. And then it is an exacerbation. So what code are we going to look up, or what code are we going to use? Okay. Yep. So we have two answers in the chat. We have A and B. J45.901 is our correct code. So if we have asthma or the reactive airway disease, would we also code that the wheezing as well?
No, because
No.
it's
No, I'm
related.
sorry. Sorry.
No, you're fine.
we wouldn't.
Right, because the wheezing is going to be an inherent sign or symptom of the asthma. Yep, perfect. I just wanted to make sure that you understood why we were only coding the J45.901. Okay. Any questions? Yeah.
Yeah. So is there ever a case where like we would list like a sequela for this? Like would they ask if it would be considered a sequela?
The only time you code a sequela is if it's going to be later on down the road after a condition has healed. Okay. So like an example of a sequela is going to be after your burn has healed, you have your scar formation, those types of things. So really, whenever you have your reactive airway disease or your asthma, then I don't know that I've ever seen one. That doesn't mean that it's never going to happen, but I don't know that I've ever seen like a long-term lasting thing that was a result of a previous asthma exacerbation. Does that make sense?
Yeah, because these are like
Okay.
lifetime, like basically like
Yeah,
if you have it, then you have it for life. So it's always going to be a symptom of it, right?
exactly. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Good question though. Any other questions anybody can think of? Okay. Let's do number 8. So patient has been diagnosed with CAD of his bypass graft with angina, and the patient had a CABG 1 year ago. So this is where we had kind of that scenario earlier, right? Where we went straight to arteriosclerosis. In this instance, we would want to go to disease, artery, coronary with the angina pectoris, right? So kind of that same path that we had followed earlier. And it does send us directly to arteriosclerosis. So let's go to arteriosclerosis. And then underneath arteriosclerosis, there is a CABG that is present. Or sorry, we're going to go to coronary, and then your CABG is present. So we'll go to coronary artery. We'll go down to bypass graft because he had it here. And then we will go to with your angina pectoris. So, Dawn, I'm trying to figure out where you got the 702 instead of the 709. No, you're fine. You're fine. Okay. As long as you, oh yeah, because 702 is refractory. Nope, I get it. You're fine. My eyes jump all the time. So we have the arteriosclerosis, coronary artery, bypass graft with your angina pectoris, and we have I-25709. Why are we not also coding Z95.1 with the I-25.709? Any guesses? The Z95.1 is the presence of a cabbage. So why would we not code the Z95.1 with your I-25.709?
Is it because it was 1 year ago?
Nope. Let's look at our code description for I-25709.
Is it because it's a complication? Or no, it's not a complication. It's a it's because it's affecting, well, you wouldn't, I mean, the history codes are for a condition that is no longer present or doesn't really, I mean, it
Well, not
still
necessarily,
exists. I mean,
because
the patient
sometimes we
has
can
it.
have sometimes we can have history codes that indicate that something is present, which in this case, the Z95.1 is the presence of a cabbage, right? But our code description, exactly, Crystal. Yes, our code description states atherosclerosis of a coronary artery bypass graft. So if we coded the Z95.1 as well, it would be redundant because our code description specifically states that a cabbage is present. We don't need an additional code to indicate the presence of the cabbage. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. I just realized I probably have been coding that just in the past
Right.
wrong.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
okay.
Yep. Which
We all
I
make
guess
errors.
technically, it's not wrong per se. It's just redundant and it's unnecessary. It's not needed. You're not coding something that doesn't exist. You're just adding an extra code where it's not needed. You shouldn't ever have an insurance claim kick out because you coded a cabbage twice. They're not going to tell you, oh, we're going to deny your claim because you have that extra code. That shouldn't be a scenario that you see.
Yeah, mine never kicked out.
Yeah,
So,
good. Good. Okay.
yeah, I did a good job.
Good job. It's always better if you're going to add extra codes for them to be redundant versus having codes added that aren't supported type thing. Okay. All right. Let's look at number 9. So we have a hypertension with left heart failure. So what's our main term we're going to look up?
Hypertension.
Okay. Underneath hypertension, do we need to code the heart failure as well with our hypertension? Or are they going to be separate codes?
I think there'll be separate codes, won't they?
Okay. They will technically be separate codes. However, we have the guideline that tells us that if hypertension and chronic kidney disease or hypertension and heart failure are present, we can assume a causal relationship. So if we have that saying that you can have a causal relationship, you will go to hypertension with your heart failure. So what code does that give us when we have hypertension with heart failure?
Is it
11.0.
Okay. I 11.0. What was the other person saying? I think that was TNC.
Yeah, same thing.
Okay. So let's go to I 11.0. Look at our code description. And then our code description is just hypertensive heart disease with heart failure, right? But we have more detail. We have that it's left heart failure, and then we have and use additional code to identify, note, your type of heart failure that's present. So we will still use the I 11.0 for the hypertension with the heart failure, but we need to use an additional code to indicate that it is left heart failure. So since our use additional note or use additional code note is present, then we can go directly to I 50.0. Or sorry, I 50, not I 50.0, I 50. And then we need to find what code is for left heart failure. Yep.
I-50.1.
So the I 50.1. Now the question begs, which one should be sequenced first?
I think B, the hypertension, because that's what it
Okay.
says.
Oh,
Yes,
I
whenever
think
it
the
says
guidelines,
use
yeah,
additional code. Yep.
right. That's what I was going to say. The guideline states that the additional codes basically will follow after the hypertension.
Mhm. Yep. Yep. So your I-11 for the hypertension with the heart failure should be first. And then the type of heart failure should be second. Christy, what's your question, hon?
How do we know? I feel really dumb asking this, but how do we know that it's a hypertensive heart disease versus just like hypertension, just like high blood pressure, for instance?
Well, because they're telling us that it's hypertension and not a high blood pressure reading.
Okay, so if I see hypertension, I can pretty much tell like it's going to be heart disease, hypertensive heart disease as well.
If there's heart failure present, yes. Yes. If there's hypertension and heart failure or any type of heart disease present, you can assume that causal relationship, and that's because our guidelines tell us so.
Okay, making a note of that because I did
Okay.
not. Okay.
And Christy, one thing that I pay attention to is, like they said, hypertension with left heart
Yes.
failure. So with is an indicator that they are together, if that helps.
Mhm. Now, let's say that the doctor just documents hypertension and left heart failure.
Right. And
Then we can still assume. We can
right.
still assume because our guidelines are telling us that hypertension and heart failure and hypertension and chronic kidney disease have that causal relationship.
So it's safe to say with the word with and is a good indicator to put them both together.
Well, you're not always going to see and or with. It could just be that
Okay.
they're listed in a problem list too.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah. So just
Yeah.
if they are present at the same time, then we can assume. Yeah.
Yeah, like I had a question earlier from one of my study guides, and it said the patient had a symptom of high blood pressure due to hypertension or something.
So if they have high blood pressure due to hypertension, we're only going to code the hypertension.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. But if they have a high blood pressure reading due to white coat hypertension, right? White coat hypertension just means that their blood pressure rises when they go to the doctor. So it's not a true hypertension diagnosis. So it all just depends on what is documented within your encounter. This is just a pretty simple scenario, right? Because they're just testing you to know if you know with your guidelines that it can have that causal relationship, right? So it really, like I said, it really is just going to depend on your documentation and how, everything is there as to whether or not you're going to code hypertension, if it's just an elevated blood pressure reading, things along those lines. Okay. Any other questions? So, Rachel, real quick, I just saw your question in the chat. Sorry. Benign hypertension is kind of not a term that's used so much in just the medical world anymore. So you shouldn't really see any providers document benign hypertension. I don't have a specific definition on benign hypertension handy at the moment. If you want, you can always go out to like Google and just kind of go out there and say what is benign hypertension versus what is unspecified hypertension, type thing. And there usually is some pretty good. Make sure you're not just looking at Wikipedia or like Bob's blog, right? You want to make sure that you're looking at a reputable source. But and trust me, even to this day, I will go out and say I am not 100% confident with whatever this condition is, and I go out and research. So don't ever hesitate to go out and just kind of go to Google. Just make sure you're using reputable resources and not, just anybody just out there randomly claiming that they have, a MD or a medical degree or anything.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely. But like I said, you shouldn't see that benign hypertension documentation anymore because it's something that kind of went out of practice like probably 10 or 15 years ago. It's now just general hypertension type thing. I know that there used to be like malignant and benign, but I think now it's just more like if it's not specified as malignant, then it's just used, as, just your unspecified. Okay. Let's do number 10. 58-year-old patient sees the provider for confusion and loss of memory. The provider diagnoses the patient with early onset stages of Alzheimer's disease with dementia. Okay, so where do we want to go look up for this one?
It would be Alzheimer's would be the first one.
Okay, you can go to Alzheimer's. I think if you go directly to Alzheimer's, it's going to tell you to see disease and then Alzheimer's. So let's go to disease and then Alzheimer's. And then we'll go to early onset. And then it gives us two codes, right? It gives us G30.0 and then F02.80. And then you can see that it says, see also your dementia and other diseases specified elsewhere, right? So let's go look at the G30.0. So G30.0 is your Alzheimer's disease with early onset. And then the second code that was in brackets is going to be the F02.80. So let's go look at our F02.80, make sure that that matches, see if that is our dementia component. And it is. So the F02.80 is our dementia and other diseases classified elsewhere, specified or unspecified severity without behavioral disturbances, psychotic disturbance, mood disturbance, and anxiety. So in our alphabetic index, if we have those two codes, one is without brackets, the second one is in brackets, we are required to report them in that specific order. Because our code F0280 that has in diseases classified elsewhere, those should not be the first listed code, because we should have the other disease that it's classified with, which is the Alzheimer's disease. That one should be coded first, and then it has caused the dementia.
It's like what it says with Parkinson's. Like, Parkinson's should be.
Does it have it? I didn't look at Parkinson's. Is it in the alphabetic index? Let's see if we
Well, I
go to
remember seeing that from.
disease and then Parkinson's, and let's see if there's anything under there that's similar. So in Parkinson's disease, there's not the code that's in brackets. So if we have Parkinson's disease, and then we also have another condition, we can code that other code separately. It's just in the alphabetic index, there's not that sequencing indication for the brackets. Okay. Any other questions that you guys can think of? All right. Any questions from any chapters 1 through 10 of ICD-10 that you guys can think of? We've got a couple minutes that we can chat if there's any questions that anybody can think of anything.
Yes, I actually do have a question, Tiffany. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes.
Yes, I had a question. I was working on HIV earlier, and okay, so for the guideline 2A, patient admitted for HIV related condition, it doesn't specify what the related conditions are. Like, I know thrush can be a related condition.
Yep.
Where can I find that?
If you go to the CDC website, there will be what's known as a list of opportunistic infections. So let me pull up that website here real quick. I always just go to Google and just type in HIV opportunistic infections, and then it should bring up the CDC website. And of course, as soon as I say that it should, it's not bringing it up. But there is an hiv.gov. Okay, so both of those websites are reputable sites that you can look at. So let me share my screen for that. So here for your opportunistic infections are going to be here. This is just a list of common ones, but they have a list for a detailed list. Go to the CDC website. And of course it's not there. Of course it's not there. Let me see if I can find it. Did they remove? They used to have a list. They must have removed the list for some reason, because it wasn't on this huge thing here. Sorry, I'm scrolling really fast. Sorry if it's even, no, it's not there. I was looking to see if they just had a list down at the bottom. Sorry, I'm trying to find a good list for you guys. Like I said, it used to be it used to be on the CDC, but since they have removed it, I'm trying to find a good one for you. So these are common ones here. So candidiasis, salmonella, tuberculosis, things along those lines. Let me find the list so that you're not just sitting here watching me like scroll. Let me find it and I will post it in Discord. And then that way you guys can have that for future reference.
Okay, Tiffany, thank you so much. And then another quick question about
Yeah.
that. So basically, anytime a patient comes in with HIV symptoms, like they're no longer asymptomatic, correct?
Correct. Yep. And then once they have symptoms, they will never go back to being asymptomatic. So once you have assigned code B20 on the chart, you will always have B20. You will never go back to Z21.
Okay, thank you.
You're
and
welcome.
also, I'm behind on studying because like yesterday I was busy because I was seeing a friend and like with Labor Day, and I think I'm taking a week off reading the guidelines. I'm going to try to get back to my study guide tonight. It's just because I've had stuff going on and I've had to take care of trying to apply for health insurance until I'm able to get work insurance at my new job. So there's a lot going on for me.
Yeah, no, that's totally fine. I mean,
And I just
that's
feel
the
like,
beauty of it is you can go at your own pace.
yeah, I don't know if I'm taking too many breaks. It's just, yeah, just like, it's just really stressed out right now.
Yeah, you'll get there. I promise.
Yeah.
Crystal has a question in the chat about diabetes. It gets confusing when you have multiple conditions. So with your secondary diabetes question, Crystal, are you talking about like having multiple different conditions with a single type of diabetes? Is that what you're saying? Okay. So if you have multiple, so like let's say for instance, they have diabetes and chronic kidney disease, diabetes and glaucoma, and things along those lines.
Uh-oh.
If they have multiple manifestations due to the diabetes, then the sequencing would just be what the reason is that they're coming in for the encounter. So if they're going to the nephrologist to have their chronic kidney disease evaluated, then the diabetes with CKD would be listed first, and then the diabetes with the glaucoma, if at some point it is acknowledged and assessed by the provider, right? If you have the due to, so if you have diabetes that's due to something, then you would just have to code whatever that condition is, right? So you're going to have diabetes due to, whatever it is. And then you're going to code, if you need to code it separately, then you would code the condition that caused the diabetes, depending on your tabular and your instructions. Does that part make sense? Am I answering your question? Okay. Jerry, if anybody has the link to the Discord available, let me see if I can pull it real quick. I know some people typically will have it. Thank you for posting that. So Jerry, the link for the Discord is posted down here at the bottom of the chat. You just click on that link and it'll add you to the server automatically. New books every year. It's not required to purchase new books every year. It's encouraged. I know that they're expensive. I know that they're an investment. So if you aren't able to get them every year, then every other year is a little bit more ideal. The better way to do it is if you can get like an encoder, whether it be like Select Coder, Encoder Pro, whatever, it might be. Those will give you up-to-date versions of every code, and then you'll be able to look at past versions of your code sets as well within your encoders. Once you get into the employment field and you do land a job, most of your employers do provide some type of encoder. It's not a guarantee. There are going to be some like smaller companies that probably aren't going to. But majority of your employers are going to provide some type of encoder just because they know that that's the easiest way for you to be up to date with the code sets, up to date with your NCDs and LCDs, all of the data files and things like that.
Okay, and I'm assuming this is online?
Yeah. So they'll be housed online. I'll show you real quick what Select Coder looks like. So this is what Select Coder looks like. This is just one of the many different ones, right? And I'm just going to throw in I'm just going to throw in a code. So you can see your code description up here. It gives you a description of your procedure, any of your pertinent guidelines for those codes, any billing tips or coding tips that they might give you. But then you can see those NCCI bundles for whether or not you should be coding certain procedures together if they're included in other procedures. It also shows you those RVUs, so it's going to help you with sequencing. And then you will have like ASC payments, any code information. These are going to be based on your RVU files, your PCTC indicator, bilateral surgery indicators, all of that kind of stuff. And then the really nice thing is it gives you your anesthesia crosslinks if you subscribe to it. Your modifier crosslinks. So if you're trying to decide if modifiers are appropriate, then you can go through there and look. And then they usually have it, oh, here it is. It's at the top, ICD-10 crosslinks. So these are just your most common ICD-10 codes that can be billed. It's on an all-inclusive list, but it's a more inclusive, non-inclusive list. Also, you have, if there's any NCDs and LCDs, I don't know where it is on this page. It should be up here. If you have NCDs and LCDs that are pertinent to your codes, then you can find your NCDs and LCDs that are linked here. It's going to let you know your MUEs, global days, how many days your global package is going to be, whether it's a major or a minor, things along those lines.
Can we see any NCII information in our actual books, or is that all online only?
No, the NCCI information is going to be housed on CMS. So the way that NCCI works is it's actually a 4 Excel file document because your NCCI edits are so large that it's even impossible to put it all in one. So if you're wanting to find your NCCI information, just go out to Google and just type in 2024 NCCI file. And then it'll take you to the page on CMS where it's located. And you can find all of your NCCI edits that way.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Absolutely. Any other questions that you guys can think of? Quick questions, at least, because we're like right at time. Okay. If you all think of anything, don't hesitate to reach out through Discord. And then I will chat with you guys next Wednesday. Y'all have a good night.
You too. Thank you, Tiffany.
Thank you.